Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Weishoff, Principal Associate Director of NIF and Photon Science. I wanted to start by first thanking the LISA Group for organizing today's event as part of their speaker series. And, as we move towards Veterans Day this weekend, it's really my privilege to welcome Captain Robert Hoot Gibson to the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. Beyond just being, an amazing pilot, an aviator, he also used to be my former boss at NASA, so it feels very appropriate that I get a chance to introduce him. Hoot holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from Cal Poly in San Obispo. This bachelor's degree was in aeronautical engineering, which kind of started his career in flight. After getting his degree, he decided to enter the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and he served as a fighter pilot in F-4 Phantom jets and in the F-14 Tomcat, and flew combat missions in Southeast Asia, making over 300 carrier landings aboard the U.S. carriers USS Coral Sea and the USS Enterprise. After attending Navy Fighter Weapons School Top Gun and Navy Test Pilot School, he served as a flight test pilot prior to being selected in the first group of Space Shuttle astronauts. In his 18 years as an astronaut, he flew 5 space flights, 4 of them as the mission commander aboard the Space Shuttles Challenger, Columbia, Atlantis, and Endeavour. And his final space flight was the first mission to rendezvous and dock with the Russian space station Mir in 1995. In his career with NASA, he held positions of the Deputy Chief of NASA Aircraft Operations, the Deputy Director of Flight Crew Operations, and as the Chief Astronaut. In a flying career covering over 50 years, he has accumulated more than 14,000 hours of flight time in more than 160 types of military and civilian aircraft. He has received numerous honors, awards, and decorations, including the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and has established 6 aviation world records and 3 space world records. Hoot was inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame in 2003, the Long Island Air and Space Hall of Fame in 2011, the Space Camp Hall of Fame in 2012, the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame in 2015, and was enshrined in the National Aviation Hall of Fame in 2013. So as we observe Veterans Day this weekend, Hoot's example underscores the remarkable nature of our nation's service members. And so please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Weishoff, thank you so very much. It is a pleasure to get to come out here and talk to I've been telling everybody I'm going to be giving a talk at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I told them I was going to tell you guys how to do nuclear fusion. I don't think I can even spell that. Well, I'm going to show some pictures, and Melissa had asked me if I would talk a little bit about problem solving and leadership, but a lot of this is just going to be fun. I've just got a bunch of fun slides for us. Well, I was really lucky to start off in a flying family. And this is a picture of Mom and Dad. And what's interesting about this picture is that this isn't even Dad's airplane. This is Mom's airplane. My mother and 2 of her girlfriends from college decided that they wanted to learn how to fly. And if you're going to learn how to fly, you got to have an airplane. So the 3 of them went out and paid $600 for this J2 Taylor Cub. And that's how she met my dad. So as a result, I have lots of pictures like the one that's up there. Houston, we have a problem. Okay, there we go. So I have lots of pictures like this one of my older brother John and me playing at an airport that my dad was managing many years ago up in Cooperstown, New York. Well, I knew from the time I was about 10 years old that I want to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot, because that's what my dad was. I wanted to be my dad, and I've been fond of saying if I have done well as a pilot, it's because Dad's the one that taught me how to do it and showed me the way. So I graduated, as Jeff mentioned, from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo in aeronautical engineering. So there's half of it. I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot. And then I joined the Navy right out of college I was hoping they'd give me the summer off so I could spend the whole summer surfing, but no. 2 weeks after I graduated, I showed up at the Navy, went through officer candidate school, and through pilot training, and I got my first choice out of pilot training, which was F-4 Phantoms off the West Coast, and at the time out of San Diego at Miramar. And at the time, the F-4 Phantom was the world's best all-around fighter. Flying from an aircraft carrier was so exciting because you went from this position to this position in about 5 seconds, and you're going 175 miles an hour when you get to this position. There's not a Tesla on earth that'll touch it. So it really goes. Now, problem solving. You know, every time you flew, and Jeff and Tammy will tell you, every time we flew the T-38s, you were solving problems all the while. One of them was fuel. T-38 didn't carry very much fuel. The Phantom carried a lot of fuel, but it sure went through it fast. In afterburner at sea level, like this photo, we burned 1,500 pounds of fuel per minute. 250 gallons a minute is how much fuel that thing burns. So managing your fuel was always something that was really critical to you. Well, problem solving. Don't make problems for yourself is one way to solve problems. A friend of mine, I asked him, I said, Chuck, is it okay if I use you as a bad example? And he said, well, you know, Hoot, I should think you've got enough of your own stories that you wouldn't need to. But yeah, it's okay with me if you want to use me as a bad example. Chuck was up on a flight one day and he was doing dogfight training. And of course, in dogfighting, man, you're an afterburner the whole time. So you're burning a lot of fuel. One of the things that you had to do in the F-4 Phantom was you had to empty this big centerline tank first because you could only pull 4 Gs with any fuel in that tank. And then you had to remember to turn off the centerline tank for transfer switch when the tank was empty because you disabled all other transfer as long as that switch was turned on. So Chuck gets into this dogfight, he's turning and burning, and all of a sudden both engines quit. He had run his fuselage tanks completely dry, both engines flamed out, and so he lost AC power. The thing you had to remember, as I mentioned, was turn the switch off when that tank was dry. Well, he had forgotten to do that. So both engines flamed out. Guess what kind of power that switch needed? Needed AC power. And without the engines running, you don't have any AC power. He ejected out of an F-4 Phantom that had 4,000 pounds of fuel in the wings. So don't make problems for ourselves. So attention to detail is really important, obviously. Well, as Jeff mentioned, I got to attend Top Gun after my first combat cruise. And that was really exciting. And it was very much like the movie. There was a lot of, well, there were some differences. There was not a Top Gun trophy. Because what's that going to do? That's going to divide the class up against each other. They're going to be competing against each other. That wasn't the way we were. It was us against the instructors. Pardon the expression, but we're going to kick their butts. And eventually, by the end of the month of training there at Top Gun, we were beating them. And so that's what the course is all about. Now, the other thing that was different from the movie is that when I was there, I didn't see anybody that looked anything like Kelly McGillis. And I guess that's fair because none of us were ever as good looking as Tom Cruise either. Well, speaking of Tom Cruise, every time I show the picture of my Tomcat, I made 2 cruises to Vietnam in the F-4 Phantom, and then I got cross-decked to a F-14 Tomcat squadron to do the fleet introduction of the F-14 Tomcat. This was my Tomcat. They didn't let me keep it though, but this was my airplane, side number 114, and you might be able to see it says Lieutenant Bob Gibson right there on the cockpit. They wouldn't let me put Hoot on it. I said, how come? I've been going by Hoot for 6 years at that point. And they said, no nicknames. I said, well, what's Bob? They said, it doesn't matter. You're not going to put Hoot on the front cockpit. So it's got Lieutenant Bob Gibson on it. Well, the Phantom had been the world's best all-around fighter. All of a sudden, the Tomcat came out, and it wasn't the best. And everything the Phantom could do, the Tomcat did 20% better. It out-accelerated it, it out-turned it by a mile. It out-climbed it, It had a much more sophisticated navigation and radar and weapon system on board, and it had this variable sweep wing. So for landing and takeoff, for loiter and cruise, we had the wing swept all the way forward like you see here. And then for supersonic flight, we'd sweep the wings all the way aft. It didn't do anything, but it sure looked cool. No, it actually did a lot. It made it a more efficient supersonic airplane. And for landing, we'd sweep the wings back forward, and you had this cool view as you're approaching the carrier. And you look at this and you go, I'm going to stop in that much distance? Well, yeah, you'd better. And you will if you do it all right. You notice there's 4 arresting cables that are arranged right here, and your tail hook is going to grab one of those cables and bring you to a stop. Okay? Now you notice you got to be pretty accurate because there are people on the left side and airplanes. There are people and airplanes on the right side, so you had to be very accurate landing on the carrier. Well, and I mentioned that attention to detail is really important to us. On my Tomcat cruise, we were in the middle of the Indian Ocean doing flight operations, and a very senior aircrew, consisting of the operations officer, who was about the most senior pilot in the squadron, and the executive officer in the back seat, who was a radar intercept officer, launched in one of our Tomcats, side number 110. And when it came time, they were not able to put their tail hook down. And why couldn't they put their tail hook down? Attention to detail. They had missed the fact that the safety pin was still in the arresting hook. So we're in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We're about 1,000 miles away from the nearest airfield. So we had 2 choices. They could eject and hope that the ship's helicopter would pick them up, or we could rig the barricade. So we rigged the barricade, and they came back in for a barricade engagement, and one little thing, one little detail put us into this mess. I was up on the island on a platform up on the superstructure of the carrier known as Vulture's Row, because that's where you'd go to watch all kinds of good things and bad things happen. And I got this photo. It took almost till the sun was completely down before we were ready for them to land. And so that's a really crummy shot of them going into the barricade. And here's a little bit better shot. We saved the airplane, but we sure messed it up. The net that grabs a hold of it rips the air data probes off. It impacts the leading edges of the wings and the horizontal tail. That airplane didn't fly for 4 months. So once again, attention to detail is really important to us in everything we do, and I'm sure all of you know that very well in the work that you do. But after my cruise on the F-14 Tomcat, I got selected for the other half of what had been my big goals in life, test pilot school. And I went through the Navy's test pilot school. That's the hardest I worked in my entire life. Graduated. It was a year-long school. And that's what set me up for getting selected for the space shuttle, because we never selected a pilot astronaut for shuttle that wasn't a graduate of one of the military test pilot schools. And this was my first launch. My wife, Ray Seddon, she had been my future wife when I was selected for the astronaut program, because she was one of the first 6 women astronauts. And so we met in 1978. 3 years later, in 1981, she asked me to marry her. And I asked her. She hates it when I say that. But we married 3 years later, and we had a bet as to who was going to fly first, because I was one of the boys. Well, we've had male astronauts for years and years and years, but our class was the first one to have women astronauts. So I figured, well, I was the youngest pilot in our class as well. I'm not going to fly right away. Well, we had a bet as to who was going to fly first. I lost the bet. The bet was for 50 cents and a jelly donut. I lost the bet because I flew first. So I launched on Challenger in 1984. This was the 10th launch of a space shuttle. And you know, it always looked so slow and majestic as it lifted off. Tammy and Jeff will tell you, it's not slow and majestic. It really gets up and goes. By the time our tail gets up to the top of this tower, we're about 100 miles an hour. And it doesn't look that way because the vehicle's so big. But it's an exciting ride to space. It only takes 8.5 minutes to get to orbital speed, which is 17,500 miles an hour. And so 8.5 minutes, you probably can't get to your car from here in 8.5 minutes. So it's really an exciting ride. Well, this was my first launch. This is my second launch, and it looks like we're going down in this picture, doesn't it? At no point in the launch are we ever going down. What we're doing is we're high enough now that we're following the curvature of the Earth. And so where are we at the end of, this is 2 minutes, because the smoke trail tells us the booster rockets have burned out, and we're getting ready to separate them. Where are we at the end of 2 minutes? We're 30 miles up, 30 miles out over the Atlantic Ocean, and already doing 3,000 miles an hour. So it isn't slow and majestic. It's really an exciting ride. We did this on my very first launch. And since I was the co-pilot on that mission, I'm the only person on the crew that had absolutely nothing to do during the spacewalk. So I was parked at one of the overhead windows, and I'll never forget, I looked through the viewfinder of the camera and I said, oh my gosh, can't believe what an image this is. If I don't mess this up, I'm going to get the cover of Aviation Week magazine. Well, it's even more than that. This picture gets used everywhere. And it never says photo by Hooter. It says photo by NASA is what it says. But now we know I'm the one that got to shoot these pictures because I had absolutely nothing to do. Well, that was a cover of Aviation Week. This one was another cover of Aviation Week. They used the rocket pack. Bruce McCandless and Bob Stewart were our two mission specialists that went out there to fly the manned maneuvering unit up to 330 feet away from the shuttle, and equally as important to them, back to the shuttle. Now, I should mention that if anything happened, we could pick them up, and I'll show a picture in just a second of that. Now, people ask me all the time, Hoot, did you ever get to go outside and do a spacewalk? And the way I like to answer it is no. As a pilot astronaut, I am far too valuable to risk me outside. But we had lots of astronaut mission specialists like Tammy and Jeff, and we could send them all out, and if none of them came back, who cares, you know? Okay, I'm kidding. We would care a lot. And in fact, we could pick them up. And I'll show you that picture in just a second. But I'm happy that I got to be a pilot astronaut because I got to be a mission commander 4 times. But when I looked out the window and saw this, I was really jealous. Now the question I get too is, what if he ran out of fuel? What if he had an electrical malfunction? Well, we could fly Challenger over to him to pick him up because, as you probably know, we have thrusters back on the back end of the shuttle right here, and we have thrusters on the nose. So we could translate. We could move sideways, up and down. So we could go pick them up if they had a problem, if they promise us enough money for doing it. And nothing like that ever happened. It was all a completely successful first test of the manned maneuvering unit. Well, we're probably all familiar with Gene Kranz, the flight director for Apollo 13, who got really famous. Well, he was really famous in NASA long before the movie Apollo 13, but he really became famous for his quote, "Failure is not an option." Well, I have a counter slogan to that by Hoot Gibson. Unfortunately, failure is always an option. And we showed that because we humans are only as good as human. We showed that with the Challenger, with the Apollo 1 fire, with the Challenger accident, and the Columbia accident. And unfortunately, the 2 shuttle accidents, they had some similarities between them, some things that we didn't really do right. And so, once again, don't make problems for yourselves. One of the things that we saw in the investigation of those accidents was after the Challenger accident. As I'm sure you all know, it was caused by a failure of the O-rings in the booster rocket that allowed a burn-through to happen. Well, we had been routinely burning O-rings. Both of my first 2 launches, which were before the Challenger accident, we burned O-rings. And the Columbia, we had pieces of foam coming off the external tank and hitting parts of the stack, the shuttle and the booster rockets, we had those happening quite a bit. And normalization of deviance. Okay, yeah, we burned O-rings on this flight. Yeah, okay, that's all right. We see that all the time. We had foam come off the tank and put a big dent in one of the solid rocket booster hold-down skirts. Yeah, we see that happen. It's no big deal. Well, that's not normal. And you have to ask yourself, okay, how often is this happening? If this is happening a lot, which it was, burning O-rings just about every launch, you need to look at it and do something about it. Now, the concerns in the case of the Challenger accident, the engineers that built the booster rockets did not want to launch on January the 28th because of the cold temperatures. Their concerns were not elevated all the way to the upper level at NASA. With the Columbia accident, we had engineers at Houston that were really concerned about the foam impact that they had had during launch, and those concerns didn't make it all the way up to the very top. And so wider communication is something that we all need, and it helps us save lives. So I mentioned prior success is no guarantee. There was a feeling when we launched Challenger, okay, hey, we've been successful 24 times before now, so we'll probably be successful this time. Well, that's not good enough. So do we really know what we're doing? These are some things that come out of those accidents. Okay, let me tell a story about myself. Here we are, training for my second launch. I'm pretty hot now. I'm mission commander. I'm an experienced astronaut. I've got 8 days in space. So we lift off, we get to 2 minutes, and this is supposed to happen. Solid rocket motor separation, and it didn't happen. We get a message on the computer that says separation inhibit. Okay, quick as a flash. I reach down on the center console and I grab the automatic manual switch, flip it into manual, hit the separation push button, and all 3 of my engines shut down. We didn't have parachutes then. This is prior to Challenger. We're going into the Atlantic Ocean, which is unsurvivable. I killed my whole crew. Fortunately, this was in the simulator. And this is why we do simulations, so that we do this in practice and we don't do it in flight. Well, okay, why did this happen? Well, this happened because I was a dummy, but more specific than that, I was rushing. I was in a big hurry. We're carrying more than 160,000 pounds of dead weight with these burned out booster rockets. I wanted to get rid of them right away. And so I was in a big hurry. Was anybody watching me? No. I reached down, grabbed the switch, hit the button so fast nobody even saw it coming. And wasn't using a checklist. Once again, attention to detail is really critical to us. After that, I did some really big time soul searching, and we sat down as a crew and we came up with some rules. And these are the rules that I put in place, we the crew put in place, and that I've used every mission after that. And that is, we're going to have any kind of a procedure that we're doing, a malfunction procedure or a normal procedure, we're going to have at least 2 astronauts working on it. You must have the checklist in front of you and open and be going through it step by step. It doesn't matter how well you know that procedure, you've got to have that there. I mentioned critical switch. Any switch that's going to be irreversible, like me causing all the engines to shut down, I'm going to put my hand on the switch and say, I'm going to flip this switch right here. Somebody else on my crew had to say, I see it and I agree. And only then would I flip the switch. Occasionally in the simulator, I'd put my hand on the wrong switch just to see if they were really watching me and make sure that somebody said, no, not that one. So these procedures really helped us because we set the goal of going through that mission, which was a 6-day flight aboard Columbia, and never have missed a single switch. Well, we did 6 days and we missed 1 switch. So we were almost perfect. But you know, all of us are only human. And so we need safeguards in place. And I always used to say, anybody can make this look difficult. We're going to make it look easy. It isn't easy, but we're going to make it look easy by adhering to these principles. Well, this was a picture right after we got to space on my 4th launch, which was aboard Endeavour, the shuttle that we built to replace the Challenger. And we came back from that mission. This was a science mission. We had the Space Lab laboratory. NASA had a big surprise for me when I got back from that mission. The director of Flight Crew Operations, Dave Liesma, asked me to come over to his office, and he announced to me in his office, he said, "Hoot, you are now the chief astronaut." And I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled, because now I'm going to be the leader of 113 astronauts, not the boss, the leader of 113 astronauts. And as I mentioned, my very first thought was, what a huge honor this is. I am really excited. And then instantly, right after that first thought, I said to myself, you know what? I don't think I'm smart enough. I don't have all the answers. Look at the astronauts that I've got. I've got 113 astronauts, the likes of Tammy and Jeff, surrounding me in the astronaut corps. I don't know all the answers. How am I possibly going to manage this job? Well, I'm going to have to get them to help me. I'm going to have to get them to tell me what they think we ought to do. So anytime we had some issue that came up, I would get my branch chiefs together, I would get my mission commanders together, and we'd talk it all out and decide what we were going to do. I'm going to make the final decision because I get to be the leader, but I want to hear all of their inputs. And that worked, I think, very successfully, because once again, I don't have all the answers. Now, for the first couple of weeks that I was chief astronaut, I was really struggling. I was way behind on the work I had to do. We were overdue for announcing a set of crews, and that was one of the really fun jobs that I got to do, was pick who was going to go to space. And there was a lot of work that went into that. I had to consider all the personalities. I had to consider their past experience, what the mission was for, what it was doing, in putting together crews. Well, I wasn't getting any work done because my branch chiefs were all bothering me. And it turned out that the chief astronaut ahead of me had not given them the authority to make all the decisions in their branch. And I figured out pretty quickly that, you know what, I need some help with this here. So I called all my branch chiefs together and I said, from this moment on, I want you to make all the decisions that affect your branch. And that did a lot of great things. That elevated their standing within their branch. It also got them used to making decisions, which I think they weren't really totally used to making decisions before that. And it gave me a chance to get my work done. And so that was a really a needed move that I made to tell them, I want you to make all the decisions. Now, if you've got something that's going to be really expensive or really controversial, then let's put together a meeting and we can kick it around. But for the rest of the time, I want you guys to make all the decisions in your branch. So here's some of the things I learned about leadership. Get lots of input, because all of us together are a whole lot smarter than any 1 or 2 or 5 of us separately. I always said, anything I'm doing to my astronauts or for my astronauts, I better be able to stand up in front of all 113 of them and tell them what I'm doing. If I can't do that, then I probably shouldn't be doing it. And so that was something that I put in place. You're not in that job to feather your own nest. You are there to help develop the talents and the capabilities of all your people and make your organization successful. So don't be skimming off anything for yourself. Develop your folks' abilities. You're going to get credit when your organization does well, but try to deflect all the credit onto your coworkers and the people that are working with you. And finally, try to get decisions pushed down to the lowest level. So these were some of the things that I figured out in the course of being the chief astronaut and also having been deputy chief of aircraft operations and some of the other jobs where I was in a leadership position. Well, for my final mission to space, I wasn't even planning on going. The first docking with the Russian space station Mir was coming up, and I wasn't about to assign myself to that mission. That was the coolest mission that was coming along in 5 years. And as I mentioned, don't take anything for yourself. I wasn't going to give myself that mission. I had another astronaut who I really thought the world of assigned to it. NASA headquarters came back and said, Hoot, they want you to do it. And I fought it for a while. I fought it for over a month because I'd been telling everybody I'm not going to give myself the Mir docking flight. But finally, Dave Leesma said, Hoot, do me a favor. And I said, yes, sir, anything. He said, shut up and go do the Mir docking. So I did get to go train over here in Russia. And my crew and I had to attempt to learn to speak Russian. Underline the word attempt, because I are an engineer. Engineers ain't taught good in English, let alone in Russian. And the Russian alphabet is all screwed up. Letters in the Russian alphabet have a different meaning than they do in our alphabet. Russian alphabet is Greek, Arabic, and Cyrillic. So like a capital H, as in hoot, that's not an H at all, that's an N, as in November. And a capital B, that's not a B, that's a V, as in Victor. And Victor ends in a P, which is a Greek letter rho, so that's an R. So I had a tough time. That was the hardest thing I had to do, was attempt to learn to speak Russian. But when we launched aboard Atlantis, I had two Russians on board with me, Anatoly Solovyev and Nikolai Budarin, and they couldn't speak English. And back then, 1994, 1995, Russia was so broke, they couldn't afford to hire English teachers or buy English textbooks. So we had to attempt to learn to speak Russian. But what happens during the launch if I needed to tell them something like, Извините, пожалуйста, у нас есть маленький пожар на борту прямо сейчас. Excuse me, please. We have a small fire on board right now. So we needed to be able to speak Russian, but I am very far from being fluent in Russian. And so usually before I will say anything in Russian, I will start off by saying, Я говорю по-русски очень плохо и понимаю ничего. I speak Russian very badly and understand nothing. So I will usually start off with that. But we did have to be able to at least be able to carry on a very poor conversation in Russian. And to this day, I can still carry on a very poor conversation in Russian. Well, here's where we were going, the Russian space station Mir. I docked with this end of the station up here in a module called Kristall, and this was pretty fascinating. It was really a thrilling mission, in spite of the fact that I fought it for a month. Getting assigned to it, it was really a thrilling mission to do because of everything. Well, this was the approach to docking, and I'm flying Atlantis by hand at this point because rendezvous and docking in the space shuttle program was manually flown by the commander. So when we got within, it was a series, in my case, of 13 burns altogether to rendezvous, to phase on the Russian space station. And then at about 4 miles, the mission commander, he or she, did we have female Russian or female shuttle commanders? Yes, of course we did. He or she would take manual control and fly it the rest of the way into the docking. So this was a really fascinating challenge. I had to line the centers of the docking rings up within 3 inches. So we're both going 17,500 miles an hour, 212 nautical miles above the Earth, but I have 3 inches to play with. So now that I've made it sound really difficult, because that makes me sound really good, we had done about 100 dockings in the simulator. So the more you practice, the luckier you get. And it came off without a hitch. And the protocol was, once we got there, the 2 commanders are to shake hands. So in this picture, I'm shaking hands with Russian Air Force Colonel Vladimir Dezhurov, who had been a Russian MiG pilot, training to shoot me down. All those years, I was training to shoot him down. And the President of the United States saw this on television that day and said, well, I guess this means the Cold War is over. So now you all know I ended the Cold War. It makes a funny story. Well, we were docked with Mir for 5 days, and we were busy. We had a lot of work to do. We had more than 400 items that needed to be transferred from either the shuttle to the Mir or from the Mir back to the shuttle. So we were really busy. And after 5 days docked together, we separated from the station, and we had 2 days to rest up a little bit before coming back to land. Well, one of the cool things, Jeff and Tammy will tell you, flying in space is the views that you get of our gorgeous planet. This was a picture we took on my 4th mission of the delta of the Nile River, and under the tail of the orbiter, this is the Suez Canal, going from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea, and of course that's what lets shipping traffic cut through there and not have to sail around the southern tip of Africa. And from space, the things that look gray or silver colored are cities. So right here in the tip of the delta, this is Cairo, the capital of Egypt, and the bright spots in the sand, those are the pyramids. So if you really know where to look, you can actually kind of make out the pyramids from space. What do you suppose this looks like at night? Looks pretty spectacular at night. And you look at this picture and you go, holy smokes, there sure are a lot of people living along the Nile River and in the Nile River Delta. And yeah, that's because we humans need water very badly. And so where there's water, there's lots of us. Where there's not much water, there's not many of us. I have no clue who this is out here. But you guys sure are out there on your own. Actually, somebody told me they think that is some monasteries that are out there in the middle of the desert. Well, that's kind of a pretty picture, but that's not the prettiest thing we get to see from space, although we do get this beautiful view in the day and the night. I was talking to a bunch of 5th grade classes one time, and I said, okay, the next picture I'm going to show you is the prettiest thing we get to see from space. And one of the kids shouted out, Las Vegas. Well, it's kind of pretty. It's kind of pretty, but it's not this pretty. So the auroras. And all of you know better than I do, there are 2 of them. There's the northern lights, the aurora borealis, a ring of light around the North Pole. There's also the southern lights, a ring of light around the South Pole, the aurora australis. And it's just fascinating to watch the aurora. And you notice in this picture, it's happening at the top of Earth's atmosphere, and we're above Earth's atmosphere, so we look down at the aurora. But it's just fascinating to watch it. It's alive. It's moving and gaining in altitude and descending in altitude and changing colors. It's really fascinating to watch. Okay, time to come back and land. This is what our space shuttles looked like, and this is a wind tunnel model flying at Mach 25. We flew this kind of a pitch angle, 40 degrees nose up, because we want a really strong shock wave. So the shuttle is a very blunt, ugly dump truck with wings on it, and you wouldn't think it would be fat and dumpy looking going Mach 25. But we want a really blunt body because we want this really strong shock wave, because a strong shock wave is a thick shock wave, and so it's farther away from the orbiter. And the temperature in that shock wave is 6,000 degrees. And this is what it looks like from inside. It looks like you're flying in a blowtorch, and that lasts for about 15 minutes during the course of the re-entry. So pretty impressive that we can build something that can survive that kind of a regime over and over again. And of course, then we're down in the thick atmosphere, and we're a 115-ton glider. And so as a glider, we have exactly 1.0 opportunities to land it. So we trained very, very thoroughly for the landing, because if you ever got behind or you ever got confused, it's going to be really bad. And there was never an automatic landing. It was always landed manually by the pilot, by the commander. And he or she would take over at about 50,000 feet on the way down and fly it the rest of the way down to touchdown. And starting in 1992, we got the drag chute finally. We had needed that for years, because getting this 230,000 pound vehicle stopped going 235 miles an hour put a lot of strain into these tires and brakes, and so the drag chute really helped us. And then if you've done everything right, You will have survived the mission, and you can pose for cool hero photos like this one. Well, that was my final space flight, and after that, my wife, Ray Seddon, decided she wanted to move back to Tennessee. And one of the things that I would routinely get asked all those years that I was an astronaut was, all the things that you've been able to do in the world of aviation and space, is there anything you haven't done that you would really like to do? And the answer was always yes. I would dearly love to race in the unlimited class at the Reno Air Races. And starting in 1998, a guy that I met through another friend asked me, would you like to race my unlimited 3,000 horsepower Hawker Sea Fury in the Reno Air Races? And I think I said, how much do I have to pay you? And so I got to fly this airplane. His wife came up with the nickname for it, Riff Raff. We were the new guys on the block. This airplane had never been raced before, and we were the new ones on the block, and so I got to race this airplane for 10 years altogether in the Reno Air Races. And this is not the most sane thing on earth to be doing, because the way we start the race is we line up, and you can see there's 8 racers here lined up on a pace plane. The pace plane, in order to be fast enough, is a jet. It's a Lockheed T-33 jet, because these are the world's fastest piston engine airplanes. And he would point us at the race course, and when we were about 2 miles away, he would point out the guide pylon, and he's not crazy. He's not going down there. And he would say, gentlemen, you look good. Gentlemen, you have a race. He would pitch up, and then we're down around the race course racing about this high off the ground. The rule for minimum altitude was your helmet, and this was my helmet, must not be below the top of this pylon. This pylon is 30 feet off the ground. I saw that as a reasonable rule. I didn't think we really needed to be any lower than what we are here. Jimmy and I are in a knockdown, drag-out fight. I eventually got past him, and I don't know, he's about maybe 50 feet, and I may be about 70 feet. And this was at the end of the one minimal straightaway that we had on the course. So he and I were doing about 450 miles an hour in this picture. And you know, if you've got to replace a rocket ship for excitement, it's got to be something like this. So I raced that airplane for 10 years. I raced this one for 4 years. And the 1 year that the engine didn't blow up on me, I got second place overall in the unlimited class. The other times, I had a destroyed engine, and I got to be flying a glider that glided about like the space shuttle, because it had a 3,000 horsepower motor in it. And the year after I got second place, we came back expecting to go even faster. And in one of the final heat races on Saturday, this happened. The induction system blew up, and it shed a bunch of parts. Parts hit my canopy, parts hit the tail. So I was done air racing for that year. Not to be outdone, the owner had lots of money, so he had the airplane repaired and bought a new engine for it. Came back the next year, and in my qualifying run, the engine exploded and blew up, and there was nothing left of that engine. And so I had a cockpit full of smoke, and the safety chase joined up on me as I was gliding back into land. And he said, "Hoot, you're trailing a lot of smoke." And I said, "Well, yeah, Dan, I got a whole bunch of smoke in the cockpit too." And so anyway, 3 of the 4 years that I raced that airplane, it didn't go well. However, then I got asked, I had been asked for 3 years, would you please race this airplane for me by the owner? And I was tied to this other airplane, and I wasn't going to bail out on my crew, and I said, I can't do it. Well, after it blew up the final time, the owner said, "Hey, this airplane's for sale." So the next day, I got a phone call from Tiger, who's the guy that owned this airplane, said, "Hey, Kay, there's nothing keeping you from racing this one now, right?" And I said, "Okay, I guess I can do it." So air racing can be pretty exciting. This was one of the hero pictures we took of me in my cool racing suit by the airplane. But air racing is pretty exciting. It's been also referred to as uncooperative formation flying. And it's uncooperative because I don't want to be where I am, and he doesn't want me climbing all over him like I am in this picture. But we wind up with some really knockdown, drag-out battles in air racing. And what was happening here, the engine, we had put a brand new race motor in this airplane, and it had not broken in yet. And so for the first couple of heat races, I could not get past Stuart Dawson in Rare Bear is the airplane. I could not pass him. And then finally, the last heat race before the championship race, that engine came to life, and I passed him and I won that heat, and that put me on the pole for the final championship race. So this was a photo of my second lap, and I did that lap at an average of 498 miles an hour and won the championship. This is way back in 2015. So after 18 years of air racing, I got to be the unlimited champion. And what happened here in this photo was I had just climbed out of the airplane in the winner's circle, and the announcer made the announcement that, well, ladies and gentlemen, we have the word from the contest committee that we had a clean race. So we now have a new national and world unlimited champion, Hoot Gibson. So I was waving to all my thousands of screaming fans. There in the grandstands is where this picture came from, and I got to pose for cool photos like this one with the permanent trophy. I didn't get to keep that one, that's the permanent trophy, but my name and the airplane's name went on it. And finally, the last slide. You guys have been waiting eagerly for the last slide. Somebody sent me this, and it was kind of funny, so I thought I'd show this as the last slide. The first lap that I ran, I did 503 miles an hour, average for the first lap. And so this is one of the funny things that I can show about air racing. So in 18 years of air racing, I had 3 fourth-place finishes, 1 second-place finish, a couple of 6th and 7th places, but I finally got to win the championship my final year of air racing, and it became my final year because I called the owner of the airplane 2 months later, and I said, okay, Tiger, we're going racing again next year, right? And he said, Hooter, I'm too old and you're too old. I'm going to have a younger pilot from now on. And I wanted to hold one finger up at him, but he wouldn't be able to see it anyway because we were on the phone. But I guess I can't complain too much. After 18 years of air racing, I finally got to win the Unlimited Championship. My wife, Ray Seddon, was really thrilled that he told me, no, you're not going to get to race again next year, because she would never come out and watch. She never came out and watched it because it would scare the daylights out of her. So anyway, those are my stories about a bunch of the exciting things that I got to do as a pilot and as an astronaut. And I guess if I haven't run us out of time, well, we got a few minutes left. I was trying to make sure I saved us a little bit of time for questions and comments and ridicule at this point. I'd be happy to field any questions we might have. Yes, we got one right over here.
As a chief pilot and hotshot pilot, how did you balance the safety versus mission responsibilities of astronauts
Well, you know, great question. I had a lot of help. I had an awful lot of help. We had some guidelines and things in the astronaut corps. We had a standard operating procedures, but for the most part, we pretty well depended on crews to pretty much keep themselves straight. And we also had a big safety organization within NASA that was a really big help. Mission control, sometimes we bumped heads with them. And you know, it's interesting too, because anytime I use the expression mission control, I will usually add right after that, you know, they really don't have any control. They can call the shots and they can say, do this, but you know, every switch has to be flipped by the astronauts on board. And so the training is really critical, and all of them abiding by procedures. are really important. So I know that's kind of a general answer, but it was all of those things together made it very, very safe and very, very, very repeatable. And we never did have a serious problem caused by the crew. So we had all these organizations in place to help us. So great question. Over here.
My question's about the second disaster, the one where the piece came out of the wing and they decided to land. In Houston, I remember watching something like YouTube, but it was long before YouTube, where the mission commander said, "Hey, this plane is safe to land," right? It was like a leading question that people felt only comfortable to say yes and no one said no. So I wonder if that was ever addressed in NASA. It's like, authority figures tend to get a little bit of too much authority. And what reminded me of that was where you came out and said, hey, we can only flip that switch if another astronaut says yes. And I wonder if, that kind of second.
Well, yeah, and I have kind of an unpopular opinion about the Columbia accident. We didn't work hard enough on that. We didn't really look into that the way that we could have. And it might be, I'm not sure it is now, but it might be that we have the capability to take a look at a vehicle in orbit and be able to see something like a hole in the wing. Like I say, we might have that capability. And if we have that capability, we didn't use it in the case of Columbia. Now, the question will come up right after that. Okay, if we had used it and we had seen that they had, we believe, a 12 to 14-inch hole in the leading edge of the left wing, could we have done anything about it? The answer is I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we could have. Maybe that crew was doomed no matter what. But my opinion is we didn't try hard enough. Because look at Apollo 13. Look at what we accomplished on Apollo 13 when our back was against the wall. What could we have done for the Columbia crew? I don't know the answer, but we didn't try hard enough. That's an opinion. We didn't make sure that we told them, hey guys, in fact, we told them the opposite. We said, yeah, we saw a debris hit on your left wing during launch. It's nothing to worry about. So we told them the opposite. But it turns out that not one of the crew members had their entire pressure suit on. None of them had their gloves on. And one of them didn't have their helmet on. And when I was chief astronaut, I had two commanders come to me on different occasions and say, hey, Chief, we don't want to wear that big, bulky pressure suit for reentry. We're just gliding back into land. And it's heavy, it's hot, it's stuffy. If we had a crash landing and we had to run away from the orbiter, it would restrict us. And I gave them both the same speech. Have you forgotten that the Russians lost an entire crew during reentry because they weren't wearing pressure suits? I don't want to speak at your funeral. You are to wear your entire pressure suit for the reentry. Well, none of them had their whole pressure suit on. Without your gloves, you can't pressurize. So I don't know if they stood a chance anyway. They may not have, but they sure didn't stand a chance without having their pressure suits on. I don't know why we couldn't tell them, hey, we're not totally concerned about your impact on the left wing, but just make sure you've got your entire pressure suit on. So I don't know that it was survivable, but it surely wasn't without a pressure suit. Yes, sir. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And of course, NASA's determined that we want to do that. And so part of the purpose of the lunar work that we're doing now, sending astronauts to the moon, we want to establish a semi-permanent base on the south pole of the moon to learn how to operate, see what our pitfalls are, see what it's going to take, where we're only about 3 days away from rescuing them if we need to. It would be challenging. It'll be frankly kind of risky because, as you probably know, it's about an 8-month trip each way. And if you're going to go all that way, if we saw the movie The Martian, there sure needs to be a lot of infrastructure in place before we send people there. And so it's a big challenge. But discovering is what we do. Exploring is what we do. And I'd love to go, but they're going to tell me I'm too old as well. So I don't know. Maybe some of my grandsons would be able to do that. I think it's an exciting quest, and I hope we can actually do it.
Hiya. First, I'd like to thank the sign language interpreter. I know you guys do a lot of work and are under the scenes there. My question concerns checklists. I read the checklist manifesto, and I know checklists are ubiquitous in a lot of high-stakes situations, you know, surgeries and pilots and astronauts. And it sounds like your experience kind of highlighted NASA's interest in checklist and checklist kind of making them better. Does NASA pride themselves in that accomplishment, or has that been something that kind of slipped under because, you know, obviously there's other excitements in astronauts and, you know, space stuff? I wanted to know, kind of, does NASA pride itself in its work in checklists?
Well, NASA puts a lot of work, and the crews and mission control and everyone associated with it puts a lot of work into checklists and puts a lot of work into training on the checklist. And it is really important to make sure that you are using every checklist every time that you have something to do. Because I remember one time in the simulator on my first mission, I missed one little step in the checklist, and that was make sure that you have set in the computer what your landing site is. And we did a deorbit burn for, let's see, where was the deorbit burn for? We did the deorbit burn for Cape Canaveral when we were planning to land at Edwards Air Force Base. And so that's not going to work. And so the checklists were always really critical. And yes, we put a lot of emphasis on them. And like I say, particularly once I had made the giant mistake that I made in the simulator, it just really points out how necessary it is to try to have more than one set of eyes on every procedure, malfunction or normal procedure.
Thank you for coming. I have a two-part question. One is, have you had any experience with UAP? And while you were an astronaut, what was the standard operating procedure if you had an experience?
Oh, golly. Well, the answer to the first part is no, I've not had any experience with UAPs, which is unexplained aerial phenomena, and haven't had any experience with it. I have never seen anything that I couldn't figure out what it was. And I don't know that we actually had a procedure. I think, who was it, Ed Mitchell? Ed Mitchell that went to the moon said that he had seen some sort of UAP when he went to the moon on Apollo 14. So I don't know that we had procedures. I never had any of the astronauts come to me and say, you know, I saw something that I can't explain what it was. So, and I don't know if they have any kind of procedures in place. I don't know where this quest is running to nowadays by the Navy, because I know they've been investigating out over the ocean several UAP incidents or reports of incidents. So that's as much as I know about it. I'm as good with that as I am with Russian. So anyway, yeah, I'm sorry I don't know much about it.
Hi there. I'd also like to ask if you have been involved with NASA after you were done flying your last mission as an astronaut, if you stayed on with NASA as a subject matter expert in any capacity, and then a piece of advice that you'd give to an aspiring astronaut.
Sure. I have not really been asked for a whole lot from NASA because we've got a whole bunch of very talented astronauts that are there, and a whole lot of very experienced flight controllers and people that are there. The one thing I did get asked to do was to come brief the Columbia Accident Board on something that happened to me on my third mission that was very similar to what doomed Columbia. I got hit by debris during launch on my third mission, which was a challenging mission because it was a top secret classified Department of Defense mission. And we took a hit on the right wing of Atlantis. And the difference was that we had the robot arm on board. So we could, on the second day of the mission, Mission Control said, hey, guys, we want you to go take a look at your right wing and tell us what you see. Well, we put the remote arm over there and looked at our right wing with the end effector camera. And I said to myself, I didn't say it out loud, I said, we are going to die. Because I could see that we had a lot of damaged tiles. We fortunately did not have a hole in the wing. We had over 700 tiles damaged on the right wing. There was a communication breakdown between us and Mission Control. I said, Houston, we're seeing a lot of tile damage on the right wing. We were not able to send down any video initially, and finally, Department of Defense relented and let us send down encrypted video. And encrypted video shoots a frame, takes about 3 seconds to encrypt it and send it, shoots another frame, 3 seconds. So the resolution down on the ground was so poor that they looked at it on the ground and they said, that's not tile damage, that's just lights and shadows. So Hoot's all messed up. They didn't tell us that that was their assessment. They just said, hey, it's no problem, we've seen worse than this. And I was dumbfounded, but I didn't want to get in an argument with Mission Control, which I should have done. I should have said, I don't understand this. On board, I have clear video. I'm not looking at encrypted video. So all the way down on re-entry, I was watching the elevons because I knew if we started to burn through, we'd see a split. We'd see a split in the elevons. And so we obviously made it all the way down. We had one tile totally gone, and we almost burned through in that location, but we had a thick metal plate there that I think was something to do with the ground plane for an L-band antenna. And so we didn't quite burn through, but we did have melted metal on the surface of the orbiter. So we had a little bit of a close call. So I got asked to come brief the CABE, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, and I told them this whole story, showed them some pictures of what it looked like, and it looked pretty horrible, 700 tiles damaged. And at the end of it, Admiral Gaiman, the chairman of the investigation, looked up and down the table. He said, okay, are there any more questions for Hoot? And there weren't. And he said, well, ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to the luckiest man alive. So that's about the only time they've asked me for anything. And you know, I have to admit, I've been away from it for long enough now. They don't need much of my expertise. They've got plenty of really sharp people there. That now, if they ask me, shoot, I'll be on a plane the same day if they want me to come tell them something that I know. But that's about the only thing they've asked me to do.
Thank you all for coming out. Thank you all to our veterans who we partnered with for this event, and thank you especially to Hoot Gibson for a wonderful presentation. Please help me give our thanks.